Let me tell you something before I start. I've kept a lot of secrets in my life. Small ones, mostly. The kind of secrets a man keeps when he lives alone on a rock at the far edge of nowhere. But this one, the one I'm about to tell you, I kept for 11 years. And I only tell it now because the woman it's about told me I could. So listen, all of it happened, every word. My name is Doran Kesh. Back then I ran a relay shelter on a world called Talon 9. Nobody official ever called it that. The freighter crews and the ice haulers just called it the cold yard. If you've never heard of it, don't feel bad. It's the kind of place that only exists on maps because somebody was too lazy to erase it. Talon 9 sits in a dead orbit around a dying blue star. Half the year it faces the light, and half the year it turns its back and falls into a night so long and so cold that the air itself will kill you if you're stupid. Minus 160 on the surface when the wind's mean. The ice out there isn't white. It's black blue, packed hard as iron, and it groans at night like something under it is trying to wake up. My job was simple: keep the relay tower running, keep the beacon lit, keep the shelter warm and the door working so that if any crew got stranded between jumps, they'd have somewhere to hole up until a rescue skiff could reach them. That's it. A caretaker. A lighthouse keeper for the stars, if you want to make it sound noble. Mostly I fixed frozen pipes and talked to nobody for weeks at a time. I liked it, I won't lie to you. I liked the quiet. The shelter was one long building dug half into the ice, reinforced walls, a heat core that ran on a slow-burn reactor, a common room, a med bay I never used, 6 bunks, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a supply dock where the haulers dropped my rations every 80 days. Outside, the tower. Inside me, and a maintenance drone I called Pick because it made a sound like pick-pick when it moved. That was my whole world, and I thought that was the end of the story of my life. Just a quiet man, keeping a light on until his time ran out. I was wrong. It started on the 4th night of the long dark. I remember because I just marked the calendar. I still kept a paper one, a real one on the wall by the kitchen. Old habit. My grandfather kept paper calendars, and I liked the way the pages tore. There's something honest about tearing a day away with your own hand. The storm had been building all day. I'd watch it come on the weather scan, a great spiral of ice clouds sweeping in off the northern flats, the kind that could bury the tower's lower array if I didn't clear it. So I'd been out twice already in the heavy suit, scraping frost off the panels, my breath fogging the inside of my helmet, my fingers aching even through the heated gloves. By the 3rd time, the wind had teeth. It came screaming across the flats and slammed into the shelter so hard the whole structure moaned. I remember standing at the airlock, catching my breath, thinking, nobody's flying in this. Nobody's out there. Get inside, old man, and heat some soup. So that's what I did. I got out of the suit. I put a pot on. I sat in the common room with a bowl of reconstituted broth that tasted like warm cardboard, and I listened to the storm try to tear the roof off. And somewhere around the 3rd hour of that night, over the howl of the wind, I heard it. A sound that shouldn't have been there. Thump. Not the wind. The wind doesn't thump. The wind screams and moans and hisses, but it doesn't knock. This was a knock. I sat up straight, broth halfway to my mouth. Thump thump. At the outer airlock. Slow, heavy, like something dragging itself up out of the storm and beating a fist against the only door for 1,000 kilometers. Now, I want you to understand something. In 11 years on the cold yard, nobody had ever knocked on my door. Crews called ahead. They flew in on transponder, they docked at the supply pad, they came through the proper channels. The airlock had a comm panel right beside it, glowing blue, that anybody could press. Nobody knocked, because knocking meant somebody was standing on the surface, in the storm, in minus 160, with their bare hand. And no living thing does that, not on Talon 9. Thump. Weaker now, Like whatever was out there was running out of whatever kept it standing. I got up so fast I knocked the bowl over. Broth everywhere. Didn't care. I ran to the airlock and I hit the outer camera and the screen crackled to life, all static and swirling ice, and for a second I saw nothing. Just white and black and the storm. Then a shape. A figure folded against the door, small, wrapped in something dark and torn that whipped in the wind like a broken wing. One pale hand pressed flat against the metal, and a face tilted up toward the camera and eyes. I'll never forget the eyes, even through the static, even through the frost on the lens. They caught the beacon light and they burned red, not glowing like a machine, burning like a coal, 2 red points in all that white. And then the figure slid down the door and didn't get up. I stood there for maybe 2 seconds, 2 seconds that felt like an hour. Every rule I'd ever been given said don't open that door. You don't open an airlock in the long dark for something you can't identify. You don't let the cold in. You don't let a stranger in because out here on the edges, strangers are the thing that gets caretakers killed. There are pirates who fake distress. There are raiders who'd cut your throat for a full reactor. There are worse things than pirates in the dark between the stars. Every rule said leave it, call it in, let the cold decide. But I'd been alone 11 years, and I am, whatever else I am, still a man, and that shape on my screen was dying. I hit the release. The outer door groaned open, and the storm came in like a living thing, a wall of white and screaming cold that fogged the whole airlock in half a second. I grabbed a thermal blanket off the wall, I pulled my collar up, and I stepped into that cold, and I hooked my arms under the figure and I dragged. It weighed almost nothing. That's the first thing I noticed. I braced for a grown body, a hauler crew weight, and instead I pulled in something light as a bundle of reeds. The dark cloth was frozen stiff. Frost had formed on the eyelashes. The skin, where I could see it at the wrist, at the throat, was white as the ice itself, but not white like death. White like it had always been white, like moonlight on snow. I got the figure inside. I slammed the inner cycle. The outer door sealed. The storm cut off and the sudden silence rang in my ears. And I knelt there on the floor of my own airlock, breathing hard, and I looked at what I'd dragged in from the dark. It was a woman, or something shaped like one. She was young, or she looked young. I'd learn later that with her people the two aren't the same. Her hair was black, so black it drank the light, spilled frozen across the floor. Her clothes weren't crew gear. They were fine, I could see that even torn and iced, a long dark coat with silver thread at the cuffs, worked in patterns I'd never seen, coming apart at one shoulder where something had struck her. There was frozen blood there, dark, almost black. And her face. I've seen a lot of faces, rough ones, tired ones, kind ones. I had never seen a face like hers. It was too still, too fine, too balanced in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. Beautiful, yes, but the way a blade is beautiful. The way a frozen lake is beautiful right before it takes you under. Her lips had gone gray-blue with the cold, and when they parted, a breath, barely, I saw the teeth. The canines, longer than they should be, sharp. I knew what she was. Not the exact word, that came later, but every spacer out on the edges knows the stories, the pale ones. The court that lives in the dark systems where no light reaches, the ones who don't eat what we eat, blood folk. People called them 100 names and most of them said the same thing underneath, stay away. They kept to their own dead worlds. They didn't come to human space, and when they did, people vanished. And I had one on my floor, freezing, bleeding, alone. I want to tell you I was brave. I wasn't. My hands were shaking. Half of me wanted to open the airlock again and put her back out in the storm and pretend I dreamed the whole thing. But the other half of me, the half that had knelt down and pulled her in, looked at that broken shape on my cold metal floor and thought one thing, clear as a bell. She's freezing to death, and she came to my door, and I am not the kind of man who watches something die on his floor. So I picked her up, and I carried her inside. I put her in the warmest bunk, closest to the heat core. I wrapped her in every blanket I had. I got the med scanner, the one I'd never used in 11 years, and I ran it over her, and it beeped and blinked and threw up warnings it didn't have language for. Unknown physiology. Unknown physiology. Blood pressure it couldn't read. A pulse so slow the scanner kept thinking she was dead, and then flinching when it found the next beat, 40 seconds later. Body temperature far, far below anything a human could survive. But she was alive. The scanner was sure of that much, at least in its confused way. The wound at her shoulder was deep. Something had cut her, a blade or a beam, clean-edged. It had frozen shut in the cold, which had probably saved her life, kept her from bleeding out on the ice. I cleaned it as best I could. I didn't have anything that would work on her, I figured, but I bound it anyway, gentle, and I told myself the pressure couldn't hurt. And then, because there was nothing else to do, I sat down in the chair across from the bunk, and I waited. I watched her the whole night. I don't mind telling you, I watched to make sure she kept breathing, and if I'm honest, I watched because I was afraid of what she'd do when she woke. The storm screamed on outside. The heat core ticked and hummed. Pick rolled in once, pick, took one look at her with its little sensor eye, made a nervous chirp, and rolled right back out. Even the drone knew something strange had come in from the dark. And near dawn, not that there was a dawn, but near the hour I'd have called dawn, her eyes opened. They found me at once, red in the dim light, not burning now, just red the way some human eyes are brown, and so tired. We looked at each other, neither of us moved. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, rough from the cold, but there was something under it, an accent, an old formality, like she was translating from a language that had different bones than mine. "You brought me in," she said, "out of the ice." "You knocked," I said stupidly. It was all I had. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile. "I knocked," she agreed. "I did not think anyone would answer. Your machines told me this place was empty." "They tell everybody that," I said. "Keeps the wrong sort away." Her eyes went to the blanket over her, to the binding on her shoulder, to the room, and back to me. And I watched her do a very human thing. I watched her try to figure out the trap, where the catch was, what I wanted. "You know what I am," she said. It wasn't a question. "I've got an idea," I said. "And you brought me in anyway." "You were dying on my floor," I said. "I don't much care what a thing is if it's dying on my floor." She stared at me for a long time after that, long enough that I started to think I'd said something wrong. And then she closed her eyes and let her head fall back against the pillow, and she breathed out slow, and she said something so quiet I almost missed it under the storm. "You are the first," she said, "in a very long time." "First what?" But she was already asleep again, real sleep this time. Her breathing evened out. The lines of pain in her face went soft. And I sat there in my chair, a caretaker at the edge of the world, and I looked at the impossible woman in my bunk, and I thought, whatever this is, my quiet little life just ended. I was right about that too. She slept for 2 days. I know because I tore 2 pages off the calendar, and in those 2 days I did a lot of thinking, and most of it was afraid. I'll be straight with you. I went through her things while she slept. I'm not proud of it, but I did. A man alone with a stranger on the edge of nowhere is allowed to be careful. In the folds of that torn dark coat I found a few things. A signet, heavy dark metal, worked with the same silver thread pattern as her cuffs, a crest, a stylized shape like a moon eclipsed by a wing. It was warm to the touch, which no metal on the cold yard ever was. A small blade curved, no longer than my hand, in a sheath. Ornamental, I thought at first. Then I looked at the edge. Nothing ornamental about that edge. And a data shard cracked dead, its light gone out. That was all. No rations, no survival gear, no transponder. Whatever had happened to her, wherever she'd come from, she'd come with nothing but the clothes she wore and the crest she carried. She'd come the way you come when you're running for your life and you grab what's in reach and you go. I put it all back exactly where I found it. And I kept watching the door, because part of me was sure that whatever had cut her shoulder was still out there, and it was coming. On the third day, she woke for good. I was in the kitchen when I heard the bunk creak. By the time I turned, she was on her feet, swaying, one hand on the wall but up, and I saw that whatever her people were, they healed fast. The gray had gone out of her lips. Her skin had a faint color to it now, high on the cheeks. She stood taller than I'd thought, nearly my height, and even leaning on the wall in a torn coat, there was something in the way she held herself that made the little kitchen feel too small for both of us. She was, I understood then, someone important. You can't fake that. It's in the spine. You should sit, I said. You lost a lot of blood. The word hung there in the air between us. Blood. We both heard it. Her mouth twitched. Yes, she said dryly, I did. And that was the moment, right there. Because we both knew the question that was sitting in the room, and neither of us wanted to be the one to say it. I'm going to say it plainly now, the way we didn't then. Her people live on blood. And here she was, weak, healing, alone, with a warm-blooded human 2 steps away in a locked shelter 1,000 kilometers from anyone. I set down the knife I'd been using to cut a ration brick. Slow, made sure she saw me do it. I'll say it then, I said. You need to feed, and I'm the only warm thing on this whole world. She went very still. You're afraid, she said. Course I'm afraid, I said. I'm not stupid. And yet you say it out loud. Because I'd rather know where we stand, I said, than dance around it and get surprised. Something changed in her then. She looked at me, really looked, the way you look at someone when you're revising what you thought they were. And she came off the wall, slow, and she lowered herself into the chair across the little table, and she folded her pale hands in front of her like she was about to negotiate a treaty. Let me tell you what I am, she said, so you know exactly where we stand. Her name, the part of it I could say, was Ussold, of the Crimson Court of Valanher, a dead star kingdom so far out in the dark that human charts didn't even have a dot for it. She wasn't a monster from a story. She was a person from a place, and the place had rules, and I'll try to tell it the way she told me, sitting at my little table with the storm still going outside. Her people were old, older than us. They'd walked their worlds when humans were still afraid of fire. They lived long centuries and the high ones longer, and they lived on blood because their bodies, somewhere back in the deep past, had traded the ability to make certain things for themselves in exchange for something else. Strength, speed, long life, senses that made mine look like a blind man's. But it came with a price, and the price was that they had to take from the living the thing they could no longer make. For most of their history, she said, they took it from beasts, from the great herds on their homeworlds, bred for it, honored for it. It was not, she said, the way the human stories told it. It was not murder. Among her people it was closer to prayer. But her people had a court, and the court had power. And where there is power, she said, there is rot. My father is the sovereign of Valanher, she told me, and her red eyes went hard. And my father is dying, and his ministers are wolves. When the old sovereign weakens, the court fractures. Each house pushes its own claim. And she touched the crest at her breast, the eclipsed moon and the wing. I am the last of the true line, which makes me to the wolves either a crown to seize or a throat to open. She'd had guards, loyal ones. When the ministers moved, when they poisoned her father slow and locked her in her own tower, the loyal ones had smuggled her out, onto a ship, told her to run for the far dark, for human space, for anywhere the court's reach was thin. The ship had been hunted down, cornered in this dead system, this nothing star nobody watched. Her guards had died buying her time. She'd gone out in a life pod, and the pod had come down hard on Talon 9, and she'd walked bleeding, freezing, dying across the black-blue ice, following the one light in all that dark. My beacon. I was not walking toward shelter, she said quietly. I did not believe there would be shelter. I was walking toward the last warm thing I would ever see so that I would not die in the dark alone. She looked at me, and a man opened the door. The storm howled, the heat core ticked. I sat there with my hands around a mug of tea gone cold, and I thought about all of it: a dying king, a poisoned court, a princess running across an ice field toward my little light, and I realized I'd stopped being afraid somewhere in the telling. Not because she was safe, because she was real. She wasn't a monster from a story anymore. She was a person in the worst trouble I'd ever heard of, sitting at my table, being honest with a stranger because she had no one else left to be honest with. That wound, I said, on your shoulder, that was them. A blade meant for my heart, she said. My guard put himself between it and me. It only caught me because I was already falling over his body. She said it flat, but I saw her hand tighten on the table until the knuckles went even whiter. His name was Koran. He served my house for 200 years. He is on the ice out there, and I could not even carry him. I didn't say anything to that. There's nothing to say to that. I just got up, and I put the kettle back on, and I made her a cup of tea she couldn't drink, and I set it in front of her anyway, because it was the only kind thing my hands knew how to do. She looked at the steam rising off it for a long moment, and then, in the smallest voice, a voice a princess of an ancient court should never have had to use. "Thank you," she said. "Now here's the part where I have to tell you about the hunger. Because you're wondering, I know you are. I was too that whole first week. She never asked me for it, not once. That's the thing I want you to understand about her before I tell you the rest. She was starving. Her people can't heal, can't hold their strength, can't even keep warm without it, and she'd lost blood on the ice, and she was surrounded by the one thing that could fix her, and she never once asked. She just got weaker. I watched it happen over about 6 days. The color she'd gotten back leached out of her again. She slept more. She'd be talking to me because we did talk in those days, long, slow talks across that little table about her world and mine, about the stars and the cold and the people we'd both lost. And in the middle of a sentence, her eyes would slide half shut and she'd have to stop and gather herself. The wound on her shoulder stopped healing, started to look angry. And she still didn't ask. On the 6th day, I found her on the floor of the common room. She tried to walk to the water tap and her legs had just stopped working. She was too proud to call out. She was lying there in the dark trying to get up by herself and failing. And when I came in and found her, she looked furious, not at me, at her own body, at the shame of being seen weak. I got her back to the bunk, and I sat on the edge of it and I said, "Ustled, you have to feed, you're dying again, in my house, and I told you I don't care for that." "I will not," she said, her voice was a thread. "I will not take from you." "Why not?" And she turned her red eyes on me, and there was something fierce in them, something that had nothing to do with hunger. "Because you opened the door," she said. "Do you understand? You are the first being in 300 years who looked at what I am and did not reach for a weapon or a leash. You pulled me out of the ice with your own hands and you asked for nothing. If I take from you, even a little, even given freely, then I am what they say we are. I am the thing in the story that comes in from the cold and drinks the kind fool dry. And I would rather die in this bed than prove the story right about the one person who ever proved it wrong. I've thought about those words for 11 years. I want you to sit with them the way I did. She would rather have died than let me become a victim in a story." And I looked at her, this ancient, royal, terrible, beautiful, starving creature, choosing to die on a nobody's cot at the edge of the galaxy rather than take a single thing she hadn't been offered clean, and I made up my mind. I rolled up my sleeve. "No," she breathed. "You're not taking anything," I said. "I'm giving it. There's a difference and you just spent 5 minutes explaining it to me, so don't tell me there isn't." I held my arm out. My hand was steady. I was surprised it was steady. "You don't get to die on my floor, Ustled. I already told you. I'm the caretaker here. I keep the light on. That's the whole job. And right now you are the only thing on this world worth keeping lit." She stared at my arm, at the pulse in my wrist. I could see the hunger in her, raw and terrible, a thing 300 years old, and I could see her fighting it, could see everything in her that was more than the hunger holding it back. "If I lose control," she whispered, "I could kill you. We are not gentle when we are this far gone." "Then don't lose control," I said. "You've held on this long, hold on a little more." "Why," she said, and her voice cracked on it, "why would you do this?" And I gave her the only true answer I had. "Because somebody has to be the first," I said. "In a very long time, you told me I already was, might as well finish the job." She wept then. I didn't know her people could. She wept without a sound, red-rimmed eyes spilling over, and she took my wrist in both her cold hands so gently like it was made of glass, and she was gentle. God, she was gentle. It didn't feel the way the stories say. It felt like a needle and a strange warm pull and a wave of dizziness that I rode out with my jaw set, and it was over in less than a minute because she stopped herself. She stopped. When she could have taken everything, she took a little, and she pulled away, and she pressed her sleeve to my wrist and held it there, and she looked at me like I'd handed her the whole world. And I watched the life come back into her, right there in front of me, the color flooding into her face, the wound at her shoulder when I checked it an hour later, already closing clean. Her eyes bright again, sharp again, alive again. "There," I said, a little woozy, grinning like an idiot because I was light-headed and relieved and something in the room had changed forever. "See, nobody got drunk dry, story still wrong." She let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. "Doran Kesh," she said, "you reckless, impossible man." "Runs in the family," I said, and I lay back on the other bunk before I fell down, and for the first time in 6 days I heard her laugh for real. We had 11 days after that, 11 good days. I know exactly how many because I tore the pages off myself, and I've still got them, all 11, in a box under my bed to this day. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it. They want the horror story. They want the monster. And I tell them the truth, which is that the 11 days I spent snowed into a shelter at the edge of the galaxy with a vampire princess of a dying court were the best 11 days of my whole life, and I wouldn't trade them for 100 years of anything. We talked. That's mostly what we did. She was 340 years old, and she'd never once had a conversation with someone who wanted nothing from her. No angle, no claim, no crown to gain by flattering her or throat to open by getting close. Just a man across a little table who was curious about her and told her the truth and made her tea she couldn't drink. She told me about Veylanher, the dark spires, the blood gardens where the honored herds grazed under a sky with no sun, lit by the slow burn of a dying star, and how the whole court would gather at the turning of the long year and sing. She sang me a little of it once, low and strange and beautiful, in a language older than my whole species, and it raised the hair on my arms and made my eyes sting for reasons I couldn't name. I told her about Earth, which I'd never seen but my grandfather had. I told her about paper calendars and why I tore the pages. I told her about the 11 years of quiet and how I'd told myself I liked it, and how I'd only just realized with her sitting across from me that quiet and lonely aren't the same thing, and I'd gotten them mixed up for a long time. She fed twice more in those 11 days. Both times I offered. Both times she took only what she needed and stopped herself clean, and both times she held my wrist afterward like it was something precious. And I want to be clear about what that was and wasn't, because people always assume. It wasn't romance, not the way you're thinking. It was deeper and stranger than that, and I don't have the right word for it. It was trust. Two creatures from opposite ends of everything, each holding the other's life in their hands and neither one closing their fist. There's no word for that. There should be. We got to know each other's silences. That's how you really know you've stopped being strangers, when the quiet gets comfortable. She'd sit reading the shelter's old records by the heat core, and I'd fix something with pick, and neither of us would say anything for an hour, and it was good. The best kind of company, the kind that doesn't need filling. And I fell not in love exactly, though I loved her. I'll say that plain, the way you love a person who has seen you and stayed. I fell into something bigger. I got a friend. At 46, on a rock at the edge of the dark, when I'd stopped believing I'd ever have another one. She gave me that. And she said, she told me straight, one of those long, quiet evenings, that I'd given her something she thought her people had lost forever. "What's that?" I asked. "Proof," she said, "that we were wrong to hide. That there is warmth out here in the dark if you are only brave enough to knock." She looked at me across the little table. "My people believe humans are prey, Doran, kind but prey, warm but small, something to be feared or fed upon, nothing more." She shook her head slowly. "You have carried me, bled for me, argued with a dying princess like a stubborn old goat, and asked for nothing. There is not a lord in my court who would have done what you did, not one, and you are a caretaker on a rock." She said it with wonder, not scorn. "If this is what the least of your kind will do for a stranger, then I have badly misjudged what your kind are." That's the HFY part, I suppose, if you want to call it that. That's the part where a princess of a court 10,000 years older than us looked at one ordinary man, and had to rewrite her whole idea of what humanity was. But I didn't feel like humanity right then. I just felt like Doran, and I was happy. And I was, God help me, starting to hope the storm would never end. The storm ended on the 11th day. And that's when they came. I heard it before the scanner did, a low thunder way off under the wind. I'd lived on that ice long enough to know every sound it made, and this wasn't one of them. This was engines, big ones, coming down. Ussold was on her feet before I'd even turned around, and I saw the change come over her, saw the woman I'd spent 11 days with fold herself away, and something older and colder step forward in her place. Her hand went to the little curved blade. Her red eyes went flat and bright. "They found the pod," she said quietly, "or they tracked the ship's fragments. It does not matter which. They are here." "Who?" I said, though I already knew. "The court's hunters, my uncle's hand." Her jaw tightened. "House Varn, they will have come to be sure. My uncle will not sit the throne easy while I still breathe. He needs a body, Doran. He needs to show the court my crest and my corpse, or his claim is smoke." I went to the scanner. 2 ships coming down fast, dark-hulled, no transponders, setting down half a kilometer out on the flats, right where the pod must have come to rest. I watched figures spill out onto the ice. Tall, fast, too fast. Moving across that black-blue ground toward my little light the way a thing moves when it's certain of the kill. "How many?" Ussold asked. 6, I said. My mouth had gone dry. "Coming this way." "Then listen to me." She crossed the room and took me by the shoulders, and her grip was iron and her eyes were fierce. "You will let me go out to them. Do you understand? You will not be here when they arrive. You will take the maintenance crawler and you will go to the far tower and you will lock yourself in and you will not come out, no matter what you hear." "Not a chance," I said. "Doran." "Not a chance," I said again. "You think I dragged you out of that ice. You think I bled for you. You think I did all that so I could hide in a tower and listen to 6 of your court's killers finish the job. I'm not built that way. You know I'm not. You've spent 11 days learning exactly how not I am." "They will kill you," she hissed. "Slowly if they think you helped me, and they will kill me regardless. There is no winning this. There are 6 of them and they are Varn's best, and I am one blade and you are a warm-blooded man with no weapon and no chance. Do you understand? This is not bravery. This is arithmetic." And she was right. That was the terrible thing. On the numbers, she was dead right. 6 of the court's finest hunters against a starving princess and a caretaker. That's not a fight. That's an execution with witnesses. But I'd stopped doing arithmetic somewhere around the day. I rolled up my sleeve. I looked out at the 6 dark shapes crossing the ice toward my door, and I looked at Ussold, and I felt something go very calm and very clear inside me, the way it does sometimes, right at the edge of the worst moment of your life. You said your people think we're small, I said. Kind but small, warm but prey. Doran. So let's you and me, I said, teach House Varn what a human does when you come to his door to hurt his friend. I turned to the console, and I started bringing up systems that shelter caretakers are never, ever supposed to touch. Because here's the thing about a relay shelter at the edge of the dark. Here's the thing those 6 hunters didn't know, striding across my ice like they owned it. They thought they were walking up to a light in the snow, and a scared little warm-blooded man, and a wounded girl. They had no idea they were walking into the one place on that whole frozen world where I knew every wire, every valve, every pressure line, every reactor tolerance, every trick the cold could play, and where I had spent 11 years, alone, with nothing to do but learn exactly how much damage a clever man could do with a shelter, a storm, and 160 degrees of murderous cold just waiting on the other side of the wall. Ussold stared at me, at my hands moving over the console, at my face. "What are you doing?" she said slowly. I looked up at her and I smiled, and I don't think it was a nice smile. "My job," I said. "I'm the caretaker. I keep the light on." I keyed the first sequence and the shelter's whole frame gave a low, waking hum, and I decide who gets to come in out of the cold. Outside, the 6 shapes reached the edge of the beacon's light and stopped, spreading into a line, unhurried, certain. They didn't knock. That was their first mistake.